Hi Aries, how are you guys? Welcome to my channel. Welcome to Mary Tarot. We're going to do your reading, Aries. I owe you an apology and I want to make it before anything else because it shapes everything I am about to say. I am sorry that no one told you this sooner. That is the apology. Not for anything I have done. We have only just met in the way that a voice and a listener meet across something like this. The apology is on behalf of everyone who could have told you the thing I am about to tell you and did not, for reasons that were mostly kind and entirely insufficient. You should have heard this a long time ago. You were old enough, you would have understood, and instead a silence was kept around it, and you built a whole stretch of your life on top of that silence, and that is the thing I am sorry for. Now, your title says this will be hard to believe, and I want to be honest with you rather than dramatic. So let me tell you what kind of hard to believe this is. Because there are two kinds, and they are very different. There is the kind where you are told something you have no way of knowing, some external fact, and you either take it on faith or you do not. That is not this. I have nothing like that for you, and if I pretended to, you would be right to distrust me. The kind of hard to believe I have for you is the other kind, the kind where you are told something you already know, and the difficulty is not in the information, but in the permission to finally accept it. That is a stranger and more powerful experience, and it is the one you are about to have. Everything I say tonight, some part of you has known. The struggle will not be to believe a stranger. The struggle will be to stop overruling yourself. So listen carefully, exactly as your title asks, but listen for recognition rather than revelation. When something lands, it will not feel like learning. It will feel like remembering. Let me approach it slowly, because it is not a thing you can be told all at once. It has to be uncovered in layers, and the first layer is the easiest, and each one after it goes a little deeper toward the center. Here is the first layer. The story you tell about yourself is not the story other people would tell about you. That sounds almost trivial, written out plainly, but stay with it, because the gap between those two stories is where this entire reading lives. You carry a version of yourself in your head, a running account of who you are, what you are like, what your defining features are, where you fall short. You have carried it so long that you experience it not as a story, but as simple fact, as an accurate description of the person you are. It is not accurate, and I do not mean it is too harsh, though it probably is. I mean something more specific. It is out of date, and it was not written by you, and you have been living inside a description of yourself that was composed by other people at a time when you were too young to know it was being composed. That is the first layer. Let it settle before we go down to the next one, because the next one is where it starts to become personal. Here is the second layer. The description was written by people who were describing their own limitations and mistaking them for yours. Think about who authored your sense of yourself. It was formed early by a small number of people who had enormous influence over how you came to see yourself, and those people were not neutral observers. They were people with their own fears, their own blind spots, their own places where life had made them small. And when a person who has been made small looks at a child who has not yet been made small, something happens that is almost universal and almost never noticed. They describe the child in terms of the ceiling they themselves hit. If they learned that wanting too much leads to disappointment, they will have gently taught you to want less and called it being realistic. If they learned that standing out is dangerous, they will have quietly trained you to stay level and called it being humble. If they were never able to believe they deserved good things, they will have passed you that same disbelief wrapped in love, so seamlessly that you have never once questioned whether it was actually true of you or merely true of them. You inherited their ceiling as though it were your own, and you have been living beneath it your whole life, not because it is where your limits actually are, but because it is where theirs were, and no one ever told you the difference. That is the second layer, and I felt it land for some of you, and I am sorry there is that word again, because it is not a comfortable thing to recognize. But we are not finished, and where this goes is not toward blame. Stay with me down to the next one. Here is the third layer, and it is more precise, and it is about a specific thing that happened to you. At some point early, you were genuinely yourself, fully, before the description hardened. There was a version of you that wanted things openly, that expressed without calculating, that reached for what appealed to it without first checking whether it was allowed. Every person begins there. You did too. And then something taught you that this was unsafe. I am not going to tell you it was one dramatic event, because for most of you, it was not. It was an accumulation of small moments, each one minor, none of them the kind of thing you would remember as a wound. A time you were excited about something and the excitement was met with flatness. A time you wanted something and were made to feel that the wanting was a burden. A time you expressed a feeling openly and watched it make the room uncomfortable, and learned, without any words being spoken, that some things about you were better kept in. None of these was a catastrophe. That is exactly why they worked. A catastrophe you would have registered and resisted. These slipped in under your notice, one at a time, and taught you a single lesson so gradually that you never saw it being taught, that the safest version of you is a smaller one. And you, being intelligent and adaptive and desperate to remain in connection with the people you loved, learned that lesson perfectly. You became smaller. You became easier. You developed an extraordinary sensitivity to what other people could tolerate from you, and you trimmed yourself to fit inside it. And you did this so young and so completely that the trimmed version became the only version you can now remember being. That is the third layer. The self-diminishment was not a personality trait. It was a survival strategy, learned young, and it worked so well that it disappeared into you and became invisible. Now I have to go down one more to the center, and this is the one your title was warning you about. And I am going to say it as gently as I know how. Here is the thing at the center. You are not who you have been pretending you are not. Read that again slowly, because it is deliberately shaped and the shape matters. Not you are more than you think. That is a greeting card sentiment and it slides off. The truth is sharper and more disorienting than that. There is a version of you that is real, that has always been real, that never actually went anywhere, and you have spent an enormous amount of energy pretending it is not there. The pretending has been so constant and so successful that you have come to believe the performance. But the thing you have been performing the absence of is still fully present, and it is the actual you, and it has been waiting underneath the performance the entire time, undamaged. You did not lose yourself. That is the part that is hard to believe. You have been living as though a truer, larger, more alive version of you was gone, killed off in childhood, or never allowed to form, or lost somewhere along the way. And that is not what happened. Nothing was lost. It was hidden by you on purpose for good reasons. And hidden things can be found and the finding is a great deal easier than the grieving you have been doing. You have been mourning someone who is not dead. You have been mourning them while they sat quietly inside you, alive, waiting to be allowed back into the room. Those of you who have followed the readings here at Mary Tarot for a while know that I try never to tell people who they are, because no one from the outside can do that, honestly. So I am not telling you who you are. I am telling you that you already know, and that you have known the whole time, and that the entire structure of your life has been quietly organized around not knowing it, and that the organizing is finally getting tired. Let me tell you how I know the tiredness has set in. Because there are signs, and you will recognize them. The performance has started to cost more than it used to. Things that were easy to suppress are becoming hard to suppress. You find yourself more and more often close to saying the true thing, the real opinion, the actual want. The feeling you would normally file away and the effort of not saying it has become noticeable in a way it never was before. That is not you getting worse at self-control. That is the buried self getting stronger, pressing upward, becoming harder to hold down. You have also started to feel a specific kind of impatience with your own life, not depression exactly. Something more like the restlessness of a person who suspects they have been living a smaller life than they were built for and can no longer quite pretend otherwise. It arrives in ordinary moments, and it asks a single quiet question, which is this it? And you push the question away because it feels ungrateful and because you have no answer, but it keeps returning, and it is returning more often. That question is not a symptom of a problem. It is the buried self knocking. It has learned that it can reach you through dissatisfaction when it cannot reach you any other way, and so it uses the only door available to it. And the door is that restless, recurring sense that you were meant for something you have not been living. Let me give you the proof that the buried self is still intact, because you may not believe me on my word, and you should not have to. You already recognize it in other people. Think about who you admire, not the people you are supposed to admire, the ones you actually do, the ones who produce in you a small ache of longing when you watch them. Very often, they are people who are simply unapologetically themselves, who want what they want without embarrassment, who say the true thing in the room where everyone else is managing, who take up their full space without seeming to have paid for it. You watch them, and something in you leans toward them, and you have probably told yourself that you admire them because they are a different kind of person than you, braver, luckier, built differently. That is not why. You lean toward them because they are living the way your buried self remembers living. The ache you feel is not admiration for a stranger. It is recognition of a relative. You could not long for that quality with such precision if you did not already contain it. You cannot miss a thing you have never had. The pull you feel toward the fully alive is the buried self, seeing its own reflection walk past and reaching. That reaching is the most reliable evidence you have that nothing is gone. A truly diminished person would feel nothing at the sight of an undiminished one. You feel a great deal. That feeling is the map back to yourself. This is the pattern that comes up more than almost any other in the readings here at Mary Tarot, and it is worth stating plainly. The people who are most convinced they have lost themselves are, without exception, the ones still able to recognize the real thing when they see it, and that recognition is only possible from the inside. I want to be careful here, because this is the point where a reading like this can go wrong and send you off to burn your life down, and that is not what I am telling you, and it would be a misreading. The buried self is not asking you to blow anything up. It is not demanding that you leave everything, change everything, become unrecognizable. That is the fantasy version, and it is a trap because it makes the whole thing sound so enormous and so destructive that you will decide it is impractical and go back to sleep. The actual return of a buried self is quieter and far more survivable than that. It asks, at first, only to be admitted, to be allowed to have its preferences count, to be consulted on the small decisions before it is trusted with the large ones. It wants to want things out loud again in low-stakes ways, and to discover that the wanting no longer brings the old consequences because the people who taught you those consequences are no longer running your life. You are, and you have simply been running it according to their old rules out of a habit so deep you forgot it was a habit. Let me give you a way to feel the difference between the two selves right now so that this stops being abstract. Think of something small that you want and have not let yourself have, not something huge. Something modest, close, almost embarrassingly minor, a thing you have wanted and quietly overruled, telling yourself it was unnecessary or indulgent or not worth the trouble, or that you would get to it later. Everyone has a small one of these near the surface. Find yours. Now notice the voice that overruled it. Listen to its actual tone. For most of you, that voice does not sound like you. It sounds like someone else, a specific quality, a particular flavor of dismissal that you could almost put a name to if you tried. That voice is the description. That is the inherited ceiling, speaking in the borrowed accent of whoever installed it. And the small want it overruled, that is the buried self, making one of its modest, testable requests and being denied again, the way it has been denied 10,000 times. You can grant that one. Tonight or tomorrow, it is small enough to be safe and real enough to matter, and granting it is how you begin, not with a grand act of becoming, but with a single want honored over the objection of a voice that was never yours to begin with. Now, I want to go back and apologize again properly for a second thing, because there is another silence that was kept around you and it did more damage than the first. I am sorry that your adaptation was praised. This is the cruelest part of how it happened, and almost no one names it. When you became smaller and easier and more accommodating, the people around you did not just accept it, they rewarded it. You were called good. You were called mature, or easy, or no trouble, or wise beyond your years. The very act of disappearing yourself was met with the warmest approval you had ever received, and so you learned the most confusing lesson a person can learn, that you are most loved at the exact moments when you are least yourself. Sit with how disorienting that is. It means that every instinct you have toward connection now points you away from your own truth. It means that when you most want to be close to someone, some deep mechanism tells you to shrink, because shrinking is what earned closeness before. It means that being fully yourself and being loved have felt your whole life like a choice between two things you cannot have at once. They are not a choice. That is the lie at the bottom of all of it, and it is the specific lie I am most sorry no one corrected for you. You were taught that you had to choose between being yourself and being loved, and it is not true, and it has never been true, and the evidence is that the people worth having will love you more when you arrive fully, not less. But you have not been able to test that because you have never risked arriving fully in front of anyone, because the whole architecture was built to prevent exactly that risk. The people who withdraw when you become more yourself were only ever attached to the performance. Losing them is not a cost. It is the performance ending its own contracts quietly on your behalf. And the people who lean in, and some will lean in more than you expect, are meeting you for the first time, and their warmth is worth more than anything the smaller version ever collected, because it is actually addressed to you. Let me tell you what happens as the buried self returns, because I do not want to leave you frightened of your own emergence. It does not come back all at once, and it does not come back as a stranger. It comes back the way feeling returns to a limb you have been sitting on first, as a strange discomfort, an awareness that something is there that you had stopped noticing, and then as a series of small, sharp sensations that are not painful exactly but are impossible to ignore, and then gradually as full ordinary feeling, as though it had never been gone. The discomfort is the first phase, and it is the one to be ready for, because it can be mistaken for something going wrong. You will feel more, not less, as this begins. Things that did not used to bother you will bother you. You will have reactions that seem disproportionate, wants that seem to come from nowhere, a new and unfamiliar friction with situations you used to accept without complaint. This is not deterioration. This is sensation returning to a part of you that had gone numb. And returning sensation is uncomfortable precisely because the numbness was more comfortable, it just was not more alive. Do not sedate it when it comes. That is the whole instruction for this phase. The temptation will be enormous to push the returning feeling back down, because you have decades of practice at exactly that, and because the numbness is familiar and the aliveness is not. Resist it. The discomfort is temporary, and it is the price of the limb waking up. On the other side of it is a range of feeling you have not had access to since you were very young, and it is worth every awkward week of pins and needles to get there. There is one more thing about this phase that no one warns people about, and its absence causes real confusion. So let me warn you now. As the buried self returns, you may feel a wave of grief that seems to come out of nowhere and does not obviously belong to anything. It is not depression, and it is not a sign that the process is going wrong. It is mourning, and it is appropriate, and it is healthy, and it will pass. What you are grieving is the time. You are grieving the years spent smaller than you needed to be, the wants that went unhonored, the version of your life that might have unfolded if the description had been corrected sooner. That grief is real, and it deserves to be felt, and the mistake people make is either to wallow in it or to refuse it entirely, when the correct thing is simply to let it move through, the way you let any honest feeling move through and out. Do not let that grief curdle into regret about the future, though. The years behind you were not wasted. They were the years it took to accumulate the evidence that made this return possible. You could not have arrived here without having lived exactly the life you lived, including all the smallness. The smallness was not a detour. It was the long road that led to the exact spot where you could finally afford to stop being small. Mourn the cost and then turn around, because everything ahead of you is where the reclaimed time actually gets spent. I want to name something about the timing of all this, because you may be wondering why now, why this is surfacing at this point in your life rather than earlier or later. There is a specific fear I have not addressed yet, and it is probably the one doing the most quiet work to keep you where you are, so I want to bring it into the light. You are not afraid of being too small. You have made peace with small. The fear that actually holds the buried self down is the opposite one, the fear of being too much. Somewhere in you is a suspicion that if you fully arrived, if you let the whole of yourself out, it would be too much for the people around you, too intense, too needy, too bright, too loud, too hungry, too alive. You learned early that your fullness overwhelms someone, or seemed to, and you concluded that your natural size was a problem to be contained, and you have been containing it ever since. Not out of low self-worth exactly, but out of a strange protective courtesy toward everyone else. A lifelong effort to spare the world the full weight of you. I want to tell you plainly that this is a distortion, and here is how you can tell. The people who found you too much were not measuring your actual size. They were measuring it against their own capacity, which was smaller, for reasons that had nothing to do with you. A person with a small cup will find any honest pour to be too much, and the problem is the cup, not the water. You were never too much. You were poured into vessels that could not hold you, at an age when you assumed the fault must be in the water, because you did not yet know that cups came in different sizes. There are larger vessels. There are people, and there are rooms, and there are whole lives built at a scale that can receive the full pour of you without strain, and you have kept yourself from ever finding them because you have been carefully pouring at the size of the smallest cup you ever met. Your fullness is not a threat to be managed. It is a gift that has been waiting its entire life for a container generous enough to accept it, and those containers exist, and you cannot be poured into one while you are still holding back. Buried selves return when the original threat has clearly passed and some part of you finally registers it. The self went underground because the environment made it unsafe to be fully present. It stays underground for exactly as long as that environment holds power over you, which is often long after the environment itself is gone, because the rules outlive the situation that made them, and you keep obeying a threat that no longer exists. Something in your recent life has provided evidence that the threat is over. I cannot tell you exactly what enough independence, enough distance, enough proof that you can survive on your own terms, enough time between you and the people who wrote your description. But the evidence has accumulated past a threshold, and the part of you that has been keeping watch all these years has finally lowered its guard and decided it is safe to send the real self back up. That is what you are feeling. It is not a crisis. It is a sentry standing down after a very long watch. Let me tell you what the returned self is actually like, because you have been imagining it, and I suspect you have it slightly wrong. You are probably picturing someone bolder, louder, more assertive, a version of you that finally says what it thinks and takes up space and stops apologizing. And there is some truth in that, but it is not the heart of it. And if you aim only at boldness, you will produce a performance of confidence that is just another mask over the same buried person. The real self is not primarily bolder. It is more honest. That is the actual quality, and it is quieter than boldness and far more powerful. An honest self does not necessarily say more. It stops saying the untrue things. It stops the automatic agreement, the reflexive reassurance, the small constant stream of adjustments to what it really thinks. It is not louder in the room. It is simply no longer lying in all the tiny ways you have been lying your whole life without ever calling it lying, because you thought of it as being kind or easy or good. When that honesty comes back, people experience you as more solid, not more aggressive, more real. There is a weight that a person has when you can trust that what they show you is what is actually there. And you have not had that weight through no fault of your own because you were trained out of it before you could choose. The return of the buried self is really the return of that weight, that solidity, that quality of being someone whose surface and interior finally match. And something happens to your relationships that is worth preparing for, because it can look alarming before it reveals itself as good. Some of them will get closer and some will get more distant, and the sorting will happen faster than you expect, and it will not always sort the way you would have predicted. There are people you have kept at a careful distance for years who will suddenly become close because The distance was never really about them. It was about the fact that you could not afford full contact while you were performing. And once the performing stops, the door you had been holding shut swings open, and someone you had quietly loved from behind it walks through. And there are people you have felt close to who will drift, because the closeness was built on the performance and cannot survive its ending, and their drifting will sting even when you understand it. Let the sorting happen. Do not rush to repair the distances or to explain yourself to the people drifting away. The reordering of your relationships around the real you rather than the performed you is not a loss of your connections. It is the first time your connections have been arranged according to who you actually are. And an arrangement built on truth, even a smaller one, will hold weight that the larger old arrangement never could. And here is the thing that will surprise you most, and it is the note I most want you to carry out of this reading. The returned self is warmer, not colder. People fear that becoming more themselves will make them harder, more selfish, less loving. The opposite is what happens. All the energy that was going into the performance, the constant monitoring, the trimming, the management of what others could tolerate comes free, and it has to go somewhere. And where it goes is into genuine warmth, the kind you cannot fake and could never afford before because you were spending everything you had on the disguise. You have been so busy being acceptable that you have not had the resources to be truly kind. That will reverse. You will find, as you stop performing, that you have far more to give. Because giving from a real self costs a fraction of what performing an acceptable self was costing you. I am going to say the hard to believe thing one final time in its plainest form. Now that we have gone all the way down to it and back, you are not broken, and you never were. The person you have quietly believed yourself to be the diminished one, the one with the ceiling, the one who has to choose between being loved and being real. That person is a description written by frightened people a long time ago about a child who was never given the chance to argue. It is not you. It was never you. It was a costume you were dressed in before you could speak, and you have worn it so long you mistook it for your skin. And underneath it, the entire time, undamaged and waiting, is the self you were before anyone told you who to be. That self is not gone. That is the whole message, and it is the thing that is hard to believe, and it is true. Nothing was killed. Nothing needs to be rebuilt from nothing. There is a whole intact person in there, and the work is not construction. It is excavation, and excavation is slow, but it is not uncertain. What you are digging toward is definitely there, because it never left. If this reached the thing it was meant to reach tonight, stay close to Mary Tarot in the days ahead, because this particular recognition tends to arrive in one large piece and then settle in many smaller ones. And the readings that follow a night like this are often where the settling happens. Here is the last thing, and then I will let you go. I began by apologizing for the silence that was kept around you, and I want to end by asking you to break it, not with anyone else, not yet, just with yourself. Somewhere private, when you have a moment that belongs only to you, say one true thing out loud, anything. A want you have not admitted, an opinion you have kept smooth, a feeling you have been managing. It does not matter what. What matters is the sound of your own voice saying something real with no one there to approve or disapprove of it, because that sound is the buried self's first breath of open air, and it has been holding that breath for a very long time. You will feel something when you do it, a small vertigo, maybe, or a strange lightness, or an unexpected wave of feeling that seems too large for such a small act. That is the sentry standing down. That is the description losing its grip. That is you, the actual one, stepping back into a room you were told you had to leave. And when you have done it once, do it again the next day and the day after, because a self does not come all the way back in a single breath. It comes back in a practice, in the slow accumulation of moments where you chose the true thing over the smooth one and survived it. Each time you do, the buried self trusts the surface a little more and comes up a little further, until one day you notice that you have not had to reach for it in a while, because it is simply present now, living where it belongs, at the front of your own life rather than the bottom of it. You do not have to do this perfectly. You will overrule yourself again, out of habit, many times, and each time you catch it will be a small victory rather than a failure. The direction is what matters, not the consistency. A person walking toward themselves stumbles constantly and still arrives, because the destination is not somewhere far away that must be reached without error. It is the place you already are, underneath everything, waiting to be uncovered one honest moment at a time. I am sorry it took this long for someone to tell you, but you are here now, and it is not too late, and it was never as far gone as you feared. Welcome back. You have been missed most of all, though you never knew it, by yourself. Rest now. The hardest part was believing you were gone. You are not